Hello, everyone. My name is Bill Sutton, and welcome to our webinar today. Appreciate your attendance. The webinar is entitled Beyond the Hype, Real World Readiness for Microsoft 365 Copilot. Today, we're joined by a couple of folks from XenTegra, our partner. We'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes to talk about this topic. Hopefully everyone can see the screen. I suspect you can, but appreciate your attendance. We'll go ahead and get started. So first, we'll do a real quick, I'll go over to the agenda here. We'll do a real quick meet of the panelists and allow each one of them just to say hello so that you can associate the voice with the name. I'll do a few slides, not very many, about XenTegra, just to kind of lay the landscape of those of you who may be on the call who may not know XenTegra or what we do or who we are. At that point, we'll pass it over to Insentra, who will run the bulk of the webinar around an introduction to Copilot and some of the things to consider. And then, of course, we will have time, hopefully at the end, for questions. There is a Q&A box within Zoom here. If you have questions while we're going through the presentation, feel free to submit them via the Q&A box, not the chat box. I will do my best to monitor those and interject the questions to Josh and Jody as we go through. Thank you. All right, so meet your panelists. I'll start on the right since I'm the one talking. My name is Bill Sutton. I am the Director of Modern Workspace at XenTegra. I've been in this job since April. Prior to that, I was the Director of Consulting at XenTegra. Been with the company about 6 years. Jody, you want to introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, thanks, Bill. My name's Jody Elkins. I'm the president of the Americas region for XenTegra. And high-level background on me, I've got about 30 years in the IT space now. I spent the first 18 years on the customer side of the fence. So years ago as an engineer, and the last decade or so on that side of the fence, I was in senior roles like VP of IT and CIO. And moved to the dark side back in 2016, the dark side, or 2010 actually, the dark side being the channel side.
Thanks, Jody. Josh
Yeah, hey
Pusateri
everyone.
in Centra. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I'm Josh Pusateri. I'm a modern workplace solutions architect at Insentra. I've worked in Microsoft 365 space for a while now, going back to the BPOS days and before. Do a lot of architecture work around migrations, cloud implementations. So yeah, you'll be hearing more from me later.
You're the
Thanks,
smart
Bill.
technical guy, right, Josh?
I guess so, if you say
We're
so.
the smartest of the three of us.
Yeah, really, for sure. All right. So let me talk a little bit about who we are that is XenTegra. So XenTegra is a value-added reseller. We like to call ourselves VAR 2.0. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. XenTegra was founded in 2012 by a man named Andy Whiteside, who was a former Citrix employee who decided that he felt like partners that were serving that ecosystem weren't doing as good of a job as they could be. And he said, the way I'm going to fix that is I'm going to go off and start my own company, which is what he did in 2012. And here we are 12 years later. We're just barely, we're a teenager, right? We're almost there. The company in the US is known as XenTegra LLC, but we have a lot of other companies, affiliated organizations. We have a nearshore company in Canada. You can see the little Canadian flag in the A there, that we leverage for some services, but that's a standalone company as well in the sense that they serve the Canadian market, but we can also leverage them for nearshore services. About a year or a year and a half ago, we started XenTegra India, again, a standalone that serves the Indian market, but we can leverage them for offshoring if need be, if customers are interested in leveraging that talent pool. We also have a SLED-fed organization currently known as XenTegra Gov. About a year ago, we formed XenTegra One, which serves the SMB market. Generally, that's 250 users or less. And XenTegra One also can do managed services for really small businesses like that as well. And then we have our mid-market and enterprise level MSP, known as XenTegra MSP, that does managed services for a lot of our larger customers around various technologies, including networking, Citrix, other EUC players, Microsoft, et cetera. So a little bit like a double click down, a little bit about us. Like I said, we're a value-added reseller, so we sell software and hardware just like every other value-added reseller. But we like to follow the model that our CEO covers in this slide in the bottom right corner. One of the things we do as a business is we, from the beginning, have been focused on building a community and serving that community. And a little bit more on that later, but effectively all of you who are on this call are part of the community. And our goal is to educate you and build awareness about new technology and help you be successful. A part of that is through our strategic consulting services. We have a broad base of talented individuals, both on our team and through partners like XenTegra that we leverage to provide post-sales services, as well as some pre-sales, design and scoping. But we can provide. We have key experts that assist with implementation and post-sales services delivery. Like I mentioned a minute ago, we have managed services at XenTegra, digital workspaces, Microsoft, and other technologies. And then we do complementary assessments. This is something that we do that kind of sets us apart. We'll do a complementary assessment for just about anything. Obviously, we got our start in the Citrix space, so we do Citrix assessments, but we do assessments around networking, Salesforce, ServiceNow, many other technologies to help customers understand what's going on in their environment better. So this is our CEO, Andy Whiteside. XenTegra was born out of a need for customer enablement and true partnership. One of the things he felt like it did not exist in the marketplace when he started XenTegra was true partnership, and that is serving kind of like VAR 2.0, where we provide value add to customers as well as to the partners that we work with, and we do that through things like this. We do a lot of that through our complementary assessments, like I said, educational webinars like this one today. We also do hands-on workshops where we'll bring the tech into a conference room or a Microsoft Technology Center, and we'll work with you directly in the technology and let you learn how it works, get hands-on. We do vendor-focused podcasts. We do a lot of these. I think the latest count is maybe around 9 or 10. We do these weekly in most cases, and they're available on your podcast provider of choice. Just search for XenTegra, and you'll see all the list of them. And then the last thing here is we also offer, of course, heavily discounted conference passes for customers and prospects. So you could go to our website, XenTegra.com/conference, and find the site where you can sign up to possibly receive a discounted conference pass. So I told you it'd be short. That's all I have for XenTegra. I'm now going to pass it over to Jody Elkins at Insentra to talk a little bit about the relationship that XenTegra and Insentra have and what that means for customers. Jody?
Yeah, thanks, Bill.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody. Good to see a couple familiar names. One in particular, Corey, I'm talking to you. So good to see your name there. Yeah, look, high level on Insentra is we're a unique business in the sense that we're 100% channel services organization. And what that means is that we exist for one reason, and that's to help partners like XenTegra offer more value to their customers. That's our whole reason for existence. What that means to you as a customer is really you don't have to onboard a new vendor, but you get exposure and access via XenTegra to a whole host of expertise that XenTegra doesn't otherwise have. In this case, we are essentially XenTegra's Microsoft capability from a pre-sales and delivery perspective. We focus on very few things as an organization. Microsoft is one of those things. And we do both professional services and managed services. For you as a customer, it means you don't have to onboard a new vendor. You have a rep as XenTegra. You interact with them, you transact through them, but you interact directly with us from a pre-sales and delivery perspective. So there's no telephone, there's none of that, what I used to call as a CIO BS between partnering that typically exists, right? You get introduced, we're not white labeling, you know exactly who we are, you know exactly what our capabilities are, and we focus in the areas of our expertise. Our relationship with XenTegra is interesting. It's been long-term and strategic. I have a personal long-term relationship with Andy Whiteside, the founder, and one of the reasons we are connected and have always been connected is that quote that Bill showed. Andy had a very clear vision about what was important to customers, and me coming from the customer side of 18 years, I absolutely agreed with that. I thought too many partners, and I think this still exists. I think too many partners don't really understand the meaning of the word partnership. It's a good marketing term and it sounds great, but where the rubber meets the road, there are very few partners, in my opinion, and that's my experience on both sides of the fence. Very few partners that actually live up to that. So XenTegra is one of those. We have a great relationship, and it's very, very strategic.
Thank you,
So with
Jody.
that, I will hand off to Mr. Pusateri, who will take you through, and Bill and I, I'm sure, will pipe in here and there, but he'll take you through the rest of the presentation.
Yeah, thanks, Jody. Thanks, Bill. Hey, everyone. Um, so yeah, let's get into it here. Really excited to talk to you all about Copilot today. So we'll just look at a quick agenda. We'll look at what Copilot is at a very high level, and I'll show you how you can use Copilot in tasks throughout your workday. We'll go through how to enable Copilot. We'll talk about some important considerations to think about before actually turning Copilot on for you or your users. And so at this point, I think everyone's at least heard of Copilot. A lot of commercials out there for it. Probably have some idea of what it does, but I just want to give a kind of a quick recap. So Copilot is Microsoft's AI-powered chat companion. There are several different modules of Copilot you may have seen throughout your workdays, including Copilot for Windows. It sits in your start menu, like a little search bar. It's kind of like a replacement of Cortana, if you remember that. There's Copilot Chat in Edge, which is like a replacement for Bing Chat. There's Copilot for Sales, Copilot for Service, which interface with CRM systems like Dynamics and Salesforce. Then there's what we're all here to talk about, which is Copilot for Microsoft 365. So Copilot for M365 is a little different because it takes the large language models used in other AIs like ChatGPT or Azure OpenAI. It combines that with your tenant data that's available through Microsoft Graph, so that when you give it prompts, Copilot uses both this large language model and your tenant data to provide its responses to you. And so this flowchart shows exactly how Copilot works. Gets pretty detailed. I won't really spend a lot of time going through it too much, but if anyone's interested, we'll send this out later on. And you can take a look. But I do want to walk you through the different modules of Copilot for M365 that's within your tenant, and also how you can use them. So you'll see up here in the top left, there's Word, Excel, Teams, Outlook, PowerPoint. So I just want to walk you through kind of a little tidbits of how you can use each of those. Before I do that, though, now you know what Copilot is. Jody, question for you. I'm curious, as a former CIO, where do you see the most value is being realized with Copilot?
Yeah, it's a good question, right? That is rapidly changing, evolving almost on a daily basis. But I think in general today, I would say, probably around automation, data analysis, help in decision making, those types of things. Anything that we can do that we're doing as humans or we're doing as humans, and we can do more accurately and much, much faster. That's where I'm seeing the most value today. That makes sense?
Yeah. Yeah, that's great.
You know what? Actually, what would be interesting, if you don't mind, Josh, why don't we do a bit of a live demo, and why don't you ask that question? Let's ask that question of Copilot and see what comes back.
Sure about that? All right,
Yeah,
let's see.
Josh loves it when I do
Let's
this.
see.
I love live demos. He's not a huge fan, but yeah, let's give it a shot.
All right, let's see. See if this
So if you
works.
can open it up
Yep, I
and
pasted this question here.
just give it a basic prompt, from a high
Yep,
level, what is the most potentially valuable aspect of AI in business?
see what it comes up with here. Decision making, efficiency. Yeah, these are all things that you just mentioned here. Data analysis, automation.
Yeah, I think personalization, enhanced customer service, those are things I didn't talk about, but yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah,
Personalization, right? Improving customer satisfaction and loyalty. Yeah, that makes a whole lot of sense. And enhanced customer service, absolutely. I think all of us are experiencing that on a daily basis. Anytime you hit a website today, you're pretty much talking to a chatbot if you're dealing with customer service. You know what? That's a general question around AI. Try just type in same question, but focused on Copilot and see what it comes back with.
Very similar.
Yeah, it's the same things. Collaboration
Yeah.
is a new one, and that makes sense. Copilot is heavily focused on 365 these days. So that makes a bit of sense. Yeah, interesting. All right, thanks for indulging
Nice.
me there.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Working live demo. Nice. Awesome. So that was Copilot in Bing Chat, or what used to be Bing Chat. That's available as well. All right. Let's start with PowerPoint. Kind of look at how you can use it there. I'm going to go through these kind of quickly, but I do want to give some idea of how powerful Copilot can be using your tenant data as well as just the normal AI language models. And so actually, while we're going through all these slides, you'll notice that in all of these apps, these Microsoft apps, there's a nice new Copilot button that gets added to your toolbar. You see it here on the top right, and when you click it, it hides or shows the Copilot chat, similar to what I just typed in. And this is where you can ask it to do things and prompt it to do things. A button for Copilot will also show up if you highlight text, like in a document or in an email. So it pretty much pops up everywhere throughout the M365 apps. So when you click the Copilot button, chat window pops up. You can ask it to do pretty much anything. There are some predefined prompts that display, and they change based on whether there's a new document or whether it has text in it, whether it's PowerPoint, Word, right? And so in this example, it was a new blank PowerPoint file. Copilot was prompted to create a presentation based on an existing Word document. So I think this is a great first example of how powerful Copilot can be, right? You can call from different components from inside of your tenant, like Word, a Word document, or an email to craft whatever you need. So you can see here that it even shows a design that could be adjusted or regenerated as needed. And so if you're thinking, well, did I use Copilot to generate these slides? I didn't, but if I did, this is what it spit out. And you can see on the right, I gave Copilot a very simple prompt, just using our agenda, and it spit these out in mere seconds. I think if I took more time prompting, maybe giving it one of our blog entries on Copilot, for example, it would have generated more content in here, but this is definitely a good start. And we could honestly dedicate a whole webinar just on prompting. I think that's going to be the biggest learning curve for users around using Copilot. And it's something we'll actually talk a little bit more on in a couple slides here. So next up is Word, and that same side chat pops out. Or like I said, when you highlight existing text, a Copilot button appears, and there's two options that it gives you. It can either rewrite the text, or it can visualize it as a table. You can even choose different tones when asking to rewrite. In the bottom left here, a prompt was given to draft a proposal from existing meeting notes from OneNote, as well as including data from another Word document. So just another example here of how you can pull from multiple sources in your tenant to create new content. So in Excel, you can use Copilot to analyze data sets without writing even a single line of code. Or if you always wanted to use formulas or pivot tables, but never knew how, you can actually ask Copilot to do that all for you pretty quickly. In the example here, Copilot analyzed the data that it was given, and it created a new sheet with graphs to show its results. It could also be used to analyze trends based on the data. It's pretty powerful. Moving along to Outlook. And so I like Outlook's features a lot. And I think what's really nice, we've done these webinars a few times already. From the last time we did it until now, actually, Copilot is now working in the old Outlook. So for anyone that's like me that's still holding out on the new Outlook, Copilot now works there as well in the old one, which is pretty nice. A common scenario that I've seen a lot, a long back and forth email conversation took place without you, and then someone decides to add you to the conversation, right? Either by forwarding it to you, saying, hey, what do you think? Or at mentioning you for you to chime in. And so instead of scrolling through that whole conversation, you can actually use Copilot to summarize the conversation and get you up to speed on its key points. In this example here that you see, you can use Copilot to help draft new emails or rewrite text using different tones. And over time, it will actually learn your tone and help draft emails in your tone as well. And the last module we'll look at here is Teams meetings. And when Copilot came out, this was by far the fan favorite. It's been a few months now, so that may have changed for some, but this is still one of my personal favorite features, and I use it almost every day now. And so there's two main ways of using Copilot in Teams meetings. You can use it during a meeting, like you see on the left here, or you can use it after the meeting's over, like what you see on the right. So first, let's look at the during a meeting on the left. So let's say you join a meeting 5-10 minutes late. Happens all the time. Copilot will actually pop up when you join and ask, hey, would you like a recap of the meeting so far? It can give you bulleted updates. You can ask it questions about what happened. It basically gets you up to speed of what you missed in those first few minutes. You'll also notice that it can pick up on emotion. So it says things like the team was happy about this or worried about that. So it really helps you capture the whole meeting. On the right, you'll see the example of using Copilot once a meeting is over. So let's say you missed a meeting entirely or just wanted to go back and look something up. I think this is the feature that I personally use the most here. So Copilot can easily summarize the entire meeting. It lists action items. It can even offer follow-up questions, which is pretty nice. And so I'll add here that all of this only works if the meeting is recorded or transcribed. That's just important to remember. And when Copilot responds, it actually highlights who the speakers were from the transcription. So it knows who made the action items or who to attribute tasks to. And you can see on the left where it mentions Serena and Beth actually by name to plan a follow-up. And so I'll also add that you may notice it may be small, but in all these scenarios, Copilot has a little footnote next to all of its responses. And so when you click the footnote, it actually refers back to where Copilot found that piece of data, either through a transcript or through a Word document or an email. So you can always follow the trail back to where it gave you its answer.
Yeah, Josh, if you don't mind, I'll chime in there on Teams because
Yeah,
Teams is definitely my favorite. I have from the
still is.
very beginning. You can imagine in my role, I'm invited to lots and lots of meetings. I cannot possibly attend them all, and sometimes I'm late. So the late function is absolutely fantastic. It can get a recap of what's happened thus far, typically before anybody even realizes I'm now in the meeting. That's how fast it happens. So that's fantastic. It covers me a little bit, gets me up to speed so I don't have to waste everybody's time because I was late. That was a pet peeve of mine. So that's fantastic. From an efficiency perspective, one of the things that we started doing just a couple of weeks ago, in fact, in Teams. So in our organization, we have something called Are You Okay? And that is all about anytime there's a meeting, an internal meeting that has 3 or more people, we ask for numbers and it's a scale of 1 to 10 and it's 2 numbers. First one is your personal number. How are you doing on a scale of 1 to 10 today? And the second one is your professional number. How are you doing at work? And it's just to help everyone gauge where everyone's at so we can know when we need to help somebody, where we might need to cut them some slack, and where we might need to support them. And it's really powerful. People love it. But we were recapping that manually for every meeting. And you can imagine that becomes pretty laborious. So just a few weeks ago, we just incorporated Teams to do that recap. And so now nobody has to capture it. Nobody has to write it down. Nobody has to send it out afterwards. Teams automatically does it. Copilot automatically does it in Teams. And we generate the email automatically that sends it out to everybody. So it's pretty powerful and changing constantly.
Yeah, definitely getting better.
Yeah, I'll say I would completely agree with Jody. I just started using the recap feature recently. I've had the actual license for a while, but I was in a meeting that I really wanted to capture the dialogue so that I'd have a summary of it. And I saw the Copilot button up there, and I thought, what the heck? So I clicked it. It turned on transcription right then, so it wasn't on to begin with, but I got a summary of that afterwards that now forms the record of that meeting, even though it wasn't actually recorded in the traditional sense. Very, very helpful for follow-up items in particular, because there were like 12 people on that meeting and lots of follow-ups from different people. And the ability to capture that in notes, handwritten or typed, is tough to do with that many people. So really is very helpful in that regard.
Yeah, good to hear. It's still a popular feature. Well, thanks. All right. So if everything we looked at so far sounds great, you may be asking, well, now how do I start using Copilot in my tenant? And so it's actually pretty simple to enable. It's licensed per user as an add-on. And so you'll see here you'll need a minimum business standard or business premium or an Office or Microsoft E3 or E5 license. M365 apps is also crucial to be installed within the applications. Otherwise, you're just limited to the web version of those apps to use Copilot in. And since it is only licensed by user, you can turn it on for just one user if you want. So you don't even have to license the whole tenant. But once it's licensed for a user, it is fully enabled for that user. So you can't say only enable Outlook or only Copilot in Excel. Once you give a Copilot license, it's actually turned on for all the features that we just looked at. It's also recommended to be turned on for users that use multiple data points within Microsoft. So people that use email and OneDrive and SharePoint and Teams. The reason for that is because the more data that exists for those users, the better Copilot will then perform effectively for them. And so I mentioned prompting earlier. I just wanted to give a high-level look at prompting with Copilot. And so I've highlighted here 5 keys to prompting effectively. And so following these would ensure that you're really getting the most meaningful responses out of Copilot. So the first here is be clear and specific. So, use natural language, ask prompts as clear requests. So for example, instead of typing help with report, just shorthand, you could say something like create a summary of this quarterly sales report, just to give it more context, which leads to our next one, which is provide context. So this could take the shape of what's called a priming prompt, which is essentially a block of text you can paste into Copilot before actually asking it anything. So you can specify your scenario, like you're an architect for an IT consulting firm in the US, for example, and put in other details that can help Copilot tailor its answers to your scenario. From there, you can then go and start prompting with your questions or requests. So it can really tailor it to your specific needs. Specify the goal. So make sure you specify actual requirements or preferences that you'd like to see in the response. So for example, you can say, give me 5 keys for effective prompting in 365 Copilot. Next up is iterate and refine. So treat your prompts as a conversation, ask follow-up questions, get more clarity on your answers, sort of like what we did in our demo, right? Asking to specify specifically for Copilot in that example. And you can keep doing that until you actually get the content that you're looking for. And last one here, use examples and templates. And this is where Copilot for 365 really stands out from other public AIs. You can link back to data in your tenant, to create a more targeted response. You saw a few of those examples earlier, things like calling on other Word documents or other OneNotes to provide its responses. And so at this point, if you're ready to hit that apply button, assign those licenses, just hold on one second. We covered a lot of the productivity benefits of Copilot. With all new technologies, there's always risk involved as well. So Bill, I'll ask you, what risk do you see with this new AI tool?
Yeah, it's a great question, Josh. I think the key risk is the data. When you talk about Copilot, this by default, if you go back to the prior slide, there is a reference to OneDrive, and one of the earlier slides you actually had the Microsoft Graph. Microsoft Graph is basically a collection of all of your corporate data. That is, things that are in OneDrive, meeting notes, things that are in Outlook, et cetera. All of that data is there and available for access by Copilot based on the user who's entering the prompt. So one of the key things there is to make sure before you turn that button on or click that button or move that slider that you've got proper data governance and security around all of your corporate data. So that, for example, you've got, say you have an employee that was in HR for a few years and then they moved into a different role. You want to make sure that all of the permissions and access rights and such that are related to their time in HR have been removed. Otherwise, in their new role, they could effectively get access to that data because it's part of the graph, and they still have access even though they may not know they have access. So the key thing is you want to keep your sensitive data, corporate IP, private and only accessible to those users that need access to it. and not make sure that it doesn't, those that don't have access to it, because access to the data means that Copilot has access.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah. Okay, Jody.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that. I think spot on, Bill. I think that that risk has always existed, as we all know, right? In IT, that risk always existed. The difference
Yes.
is
Yes.
now you had to know as a user, you
You
had to
did.
know, or you had to go looking for it. And I always made the argument as a CIO that if someone was going to look for something they shouldn't be looking for, you already have a challenge, a problem with that employee, right?
Yeah.
And so the difference is now Copilot doesn't care whether you should or not. It's just literally going to see and use whatever it has access to. And that creates a significant risk in the case, in the past, it was mitigated. And a lot of organizations and a lot of CIOs, myself included, at times recommended not focusing on that risk at the moment because there were higher priorities. I would argue now as a CIO, that's a significant risk. So it's something
Yes.
that needs to be addressed.
And we have a question in the chat, Jody, I think came about our conversation. Is there a way to limit what MS Graph can see? How can we silo sensitive data?
Yeah, Josh, you want to take that?
Yeah. Yeah. So the first part of that is you can't hide anything from Microsoft Graph. It sees everything. But to your second question, yeah, we're gonna get into that in a little bit. There are some ways, some tools to implement that can help with that. Definitely. All right. So I think that's a good segue into our security conversation here. And I think a lot of the points you just heard, I'll definitely, reiterate because it is really important, obviously, when rolling out Copilot. But first, I want to take a look at this graphic here. This is pulled from Microsoft directly, and the words here I want to stress are at the bottom where it says users will only be able to search the information they already have access to. And so thinking about that and what you just heard, right, there's a huge assumption here that users actually only have access to the data they should, because it's more than likely that they don't. And I want to give another example, sort of similar to what Bill just shared, um, but I think it's a real life scenario here because by default, um, when a tenant's created, you get a SharePoint site and a team that are created with all members automatically given access. If you have a tenant right now and you haven't touched this team or site, it's probably still there. And so I've had customers not touch it because they thought if it was removed, maybe something would break. Maybe that was holding up Teams or holding up SharePoint. It's not, so you could delete it if you're not using it. But what this means is if it's still there, that when new users are added to the tenant, they automatically get added to that site and team. So let's say you're just getting started in 365. Someone decides to use this site or team to store public HR data, code of conduct, documents, leave policies, benefit information, things like that. Putting those things in a global SharePoint site is pretty common, right? So it doesn't raise any red flags. But fast forward a few months later, company grows, new HR staff gets hired. Someone sees this folder called HR, and they say, "Hey, I'm gonna put a folder here called personnel, and I'm gonna store PII data in there. I'm gonna store social security numbers, maybe salary information, performance review notes, things like that." And like what was mentioned, no users would know they have access to those files unless they were actually digging around and looking for it. Um, and so that people would really never know that they had access, right, until now, because Copilot would know because they see all of that. So it would know you have access, and it would include those results in the prompts. You may
Right.
not even ask specifically for that information. And this is an example that I actually came across when looking at suggested prompts. Copilot recommends one that says, show me the latest about X colleague. You could put anyone in there. And so imagine if you did that and it returned information about their performance review comments, right? Just as an example. So that wouldn't be good. So the next question you have and was asked actually is, how do I make sure this doesn't happen, right? How do I make sure users only have access to the data that they should have access to? And so we call this just enough access. And there's a lot of governance and security features in your tenant you may already be licensed for that can be used to help ensure that your data is secured. And so a couple of these examples here Bill mentioned, and I'll walk through them also. But there are a lot of things here that you can enable to get your tenant ready for Copilot. And the goal of all of this is to prevent oversharing, right? Ensuring users really only have access to what they should have access to. I'm sure a lot of these also look familiar to you. They're probably topics you may have dismissed in the past, like Jody mentioned, right? These are all considered advanced features. Maybe you thought, oh, my tenant doesn't need that enabled. Our data's in good shape. Maybe never had a good business case for getting these deployed, right? Things like information protection, data classification, labeling, all through Microsoft Purview, enabling data loss prevention, DLP policies that can help protect your PII or other confidential data. You can use labeling, for example, just to decide who has access to certain data once the label is applied, or whether data can be shared internally or externally, right? These are great ways to make sure your data is protected, and going back to that, users that have just enough access to the data. Apart from that, it's also important to look at your SharePoint settings, your sharing settings, access control policies, making sure no one's a member of a site they shouldn't be. Going back to what Bill said, we know with HR. Only keeping finance or HR data in the finance or HR site, only making sure that those team members have access to that site, right? Making sure everything's properly locked down. And so Copilot will take all of that, all the labeling, classification, DLP policy settings. It'll take all of that into consideration when it's giving prompts and looking at data. It would never reveal information to users that it shouldn't, but the key is it has to be configured and configured properly, right? You have to make sure that your house is in order, as some say, before enabling Copilot. So even if you just enable and assign one license to one user, Copilot would still go and see everything that user has at least view access to. And so another important topic to consider, apart from that, is securing your data. But besides securing your data, is looking at the data itself. So Copilot won't distinguish between a file created 10 years ago versus something created last week, let's say. So if there are old documents with outdated information, Copilot could then return those results that are just factually wrong, or don't matter anymore. So as with all AI, it's always advised to fact check, validate output. Like I said earlier, Copilot always provides its sources, which is nice. But to avoid that altogether, good practice would be, you see here, to clean up rot data, redundant, obsolete, trivial data. Archive it, purge it, just get it off 365 essentially. Training staff on good hygiene is also important, right? Not keeping multiple copies or versions of the same document, for example. So if you have to take one thing away from this slide, I think it's just the fact that people probably have access to more than you think. And the time to find that out and fix it is before giving Copilot licenses out, right? And not after. And so I wanted to quickly share a use case that shows how important preparing for Copilot is, and what could happen if you turned on Copilot without any of that security in place that we just talked about. So in this example, we look at healthcare, more specifically patient care and patient support. And I actually had Copilot design this slide for me once I gave it its context. I left it the way it was. I think it added that stethoscope. So some ways Copilot can be used to enhance patient care could be providing automated support for appointment scheduling. It could automatically send notifications to act as medication reminders. It could assist with preliminary symptom checking, right? So taking into consideration all those security challenges we just mentioned, you can see that a data breach of this underlying patient data could lead to ransomware, other attacks. It could have real severe consequences for patients' PII or PHI. Misclassification of this data can also lead to sensitive information being exposed. So this is really just one example of why it's so important to prevent that unauthorized access to data before you start using Copilot. Okay, so what's next, right? Now I have all this information. How can I make sure that my tenant is ready for Copilot? So we offer Copilot readiness assessments that leave you with an actionable roadmap to start enabling Copilot. We do a series of workshops with you. Our architects work with you to understand your business needs. We evaluate your tenant's readiness to adopt Copilot. We use tools that can help understand the sensitivity and the risk of your data, of your M365 data, as well as it helps find rot data, redundant, obsolete, trivial data, right? It also ensures that the correct metadata gets applied that would enhance the accuracy of Copilot results. We can advise on which users or departments may benefit from Copilot immediately. We can ensure that your tenant is protected from a security and governance standpoint. Going back to everything we spoke about, to avoid any of those security and permissions gaps. So if anyone's interested in hearing more about this readiness assessment, just reach out to your XenTegra reps, and we could definitely continue this conversation there.
Yep.
And that's it for me. I'll see if any questions in the chat, Bill, or.
Nothing in the chat. I don't think there's anything in the question dialogue, but I have a question I want to ask, just as a general one. Maybe it'll benefit somebody on the call. So,
Sure.
Josh, you mentioned earlier that the large language models, and I'll try not to get too technical, but one of the things that I've read in the tech press is relative to OpenAI's large language model, the one that feeds ChatGPT that so many people are used to. It learns from what people put into it. In other words, as I understand it, does it not? If I put a prompt in for certain data and it gives me a response, it learns from that, it uploads that. Does that same activity occur within Copilot? Is the LLM learning from the prompts and related responses?
Yeah, it's a great question and a good security question too. And just to expand on what you said,
Yeah.
It doesn't only learn from these talking about these ChatGPT, for example. It doesn't learn from your prompt. It learns from everyone's, right?
Right. Exactly.
So something you feed in may then enhance someone else's result, which you obviously could see as a huge issue if that was the case here, but it's not.
Okay.
Which is great. So Copilot for Microsoft 365 specifically is locked to your tenant, and it's locked to your users also. So even within your tenant, a user's prompts won't learn from that for someone else. It won't even learn from that from yourself. Actually, it pretty much wipes itself, from each topic that you do. So it does make sure that there's no no data leakage or anything like that, right? Because it doesn't actually store anything. It just uses Graph, which already has this information, and works off that.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Great. All right. So we're at the end of the webinar, folks. There's still got a few people here, which is fantastic. Any other questions? Any questions? All right. We just got another one just popped in. Thank you, Tony. Do you have any recommendations for finding stale data?
Yeah. So like I said, there are some third-party tools that we use that as part of our assessments that run through your environment and will identify old data. That's the way we do it.
Yeah, it's one of many things we do as part of the Copilot readiness assessment. We're looking at business processes that you have existing business processes. We're looking and pulling out of you desired business processes. Excuse me. Copilot's one of the few technologies that over the last 15 to 20 years has really gotten the attention of the C-suite, the business side of organizations. And so I would imagine that most, if not all of you, are getting some level of pressure from the business to enable Copilot or tell the business how you can use Copilot to enhance things. These are conversations that are taking place constantly, and it's a little bit different than what we've been dealing with in IT for the last couple of decades, meaning that the business is putting that pressure on. So it's really important from a readiness assessment perspective, we're not just looking technically at data. That's certainly one thing that we're doing. We're looking at your processes. We're looking at your tenant security configurations. We're looking at your sharing practices. We're also talking to users and leaders of users to understand how they're sharing. Because while we can see some of that from a technical perspective, there are a lot of ways everybody here knows shadow IT exists, and there are a lot of ways to share data. So we're trying to uncover that. We're also talking to the C-suite in specific workshops to understand what it is they want to do and what it is they need to do. And then we coalesce all of that into here's a prioritized list of actions and an action plan that Josh was talking about in order to get your house in order and enable Copilot. The reality of that approach is many people would think, well, there's so much work we have to do. Man, that could be 18 to 24 months before we're ready to enable Copilot. And that is oftentimes an initial reaction. The reality of our world is, though, That doesn't work. So what we have to do is prioritize the effort of cleanup, of getting your house in order, and along the way, identify the right use cases and the right personas within your organization to which you can enable Copilot, and what types of use cases that you can enable Copilot for different things. And so, for instance, in Teams, we went through this process ourselves. Initially, when we enabled Copilot, I talked about the benefits of Copilot in Teams specifically for me. Well, not everyone on my team had access to Copilot initially. I had access to Copilot, and so therefore I was driving that action within Teams enablement, within the Teams meetings. As we continue to expand and go through our own process of readiness assessment and readiness enablement, we expanded the use of that and expanded the license usage of Copilot. So that's how it works. And so that allows you to do two things at once. One, start enhancing your capabilities within your organization and enhancing your security and mitigating your risks. And at the same time, enabling your users in the business side of your organization to start using Copilot to get benefits. And just like anything else, change is difficult for humans and change takes time. So having that overall plan works really well because you can manage both effectively. By the time your organization gets used to doing one thing in Copilot, or a piece of your organization gets used to doing one thing in Copilot, and they're now asking for something else, well, now you've also progressed on the IT side, and you now have better capabilities. And so now you can expand the use of Copilot, perhaps. That's the marriage that is really, really important in this process. Otherwise, what happens is the IT organization will just continue to upset business like we used to do years ago, because we're preventing them from doing something. And change will happen. I'm a big believer in, if you want change, you got two options: change people or change people. So it's important that you combine both those things, and that's what we help organizations do.
Thank you, Jody. All right. Any other questions from the attendees today? Put them in the chat, the webinar chat, or in the Q&A dialogue. Thank you, Tony, for the kudos. Appreciate that.
Thank you, Tony.
Yep. All right. Well, we've still got about 13 minutes left, but if there's no questions, we'll go ahead and close it out. Any final thoughts, Jody?
No, I just want to appreciate everybody's time. And we are, as we've said multiple times, we're here to help, and happy to have a conversation just to help you explore this a bit. We do a number of power hours with customers. This is a new and oftentimes confusing and complex solution workload. And so we're happy to just have a conversation and sort of vet it out with you and determine, is there a way for us to work with you or not? Or maybe we just give you some advice and you go off on your own. Totally up to you, but happy to have those conversations.
Right. Thanks, Jody. Josh, any final thoughts?
No, I just think, yeah, thanks everyone for your time.
Yep.
Doing
I'll
something.
echo that. Thank you, Josh. Yeah, appreciate you all spending the time with us today. Like Jody said earlier, if you have any questions or need additional information, please feel free to reach out to your XenTegra rep. You can also reach out directly to me. I'm on LinkedIn. So feel free, and we'll connect you with the appropriate folks and take it to the next step. So thanks again for the time today. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.